Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a brief lecture on energy in the cell. As this lecture is going on, you should be taking notes and pausing the video at times to be able to take notes. At the end of class, or by the end of class, you should be summarizing this lecture with a 5 to 7 sentence paragraph through the assignment on Google Classroom. So let's get started. Our first key concept is all cells need blank. Well, all cells need energy. Very specifically, they need chemical energy. Now, that chemical energy that they need is something called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP, when simplified, looks something like this. So over here we have our adenosine molecule, a ribose, which is a fancy word for sugar, and 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. The energy in this chemical energy, ATP, is actually held in between the bonds of these phosphate groups. So between the ribose and the first bond, we have a little bit. Between the first and second, we have a little bit more. And then the second and third, we have the most energy. If we were to look at kind of the organic chemistry version of this is what it looks like. So it's opposite to what we just saw. Here's our adenosine, here's our ribose, and here are 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. That's where we get the tri from. Now, I'm not very good at biochemistry, and I don't expect you guys to be either, so I've made this analogy to help you out. ATP is kind of like a wallet with $3 in it. The wallet represents the adenosine and the ribose, and the $3 are the 3 phosphate groups. Now, you might decide that you want to get some energy in the form of food. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to spend $1 and you're going to purchase a snack. And this snack is going to help you get some energy back. It's going to help you do some cellular processes. But then, oh no, you've spent $1. Now you have adenosine diphosphate. The di means 2. You only have $2 and 2 phosphate groups. Now with this, imagine that you always have to keep $2 in your wallet to be able to catch the bus, just in case. Well, that's kind of what ATP and ADP are like. They will not break the bond between that first and second phosphate group, only between the second and third. They always try to retain 2 phosphate groups because the amount of energy it would take to bond 1 and 2 together is way more than it would take to bond 2 and 3 together. So they always retain those $2. Well, it's kind of useless walking around with a wallet with $2 that you have to save for the bus. So let's say you do a little bit of work and your friend's like, hey, here's $1. Thanks for helping me with my homework. Then you have ATP again. And this is an actual cycle that these molecules go through called the ATP-ADP cycle. You have your ATP molecule up here, the bond is broken, a phosphate is released, and energy is released for some cellular function, something the cell wants to do. That produces ADP, and then energy is added back in so it can rebond that last phosphate group, and then ATP is formed, and it just keeps on going around and around and around like that. So let's review really quickly. Blank is the type of chemical energy used by all life. ATP is the type of chemical energy used by all life. ATP is short for blank. ATP is short for adenosine triphosphate. Energy is released from ATP when blank happens. Energy is released from ATP when a bond is broken between the second and third phosphate group. So that kind of wraps up talking about ATP. Now, as this lecture continues, this is the guiding question that I want you to keep in your mind as you're taking your notes, and this is kind of the guiding question that you're going to use to write your summary paragraph. So which processes transform energy from sunlight into ATP? Now, the cool thing is, if you've been paying attention for the last few weeks in class, you're already a third of the way done with this lecture. And here's why. We're going to review. Blank is the process in which sunlight is converted into sugars. Photosynthesis is the process in which sunlight is converted into sugars. Blank carry out photosynthesis in their blank. Plants carry out photosynthesis in their chloroplasts. During photosynthesis, blank and blank are recombined to create blank and blank. During photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water are recombined to create sugar and oxygen. So how did you do? Feeling pretty confident? Just as a friendly reminder, because we didn't work with it too much, here is the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water, a little bit of solar energy, will produce a sugar and 6 molecules of oxygen. Now, all of this energy is pretty much being stored in the bonds of this sugar, much like the bonds of that ATP molecule. So, how do we access the energy the sugar molecule is storing? Well, there is a process that we undergo called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is this cool process that breaks down sugars to produce ATP energy. Cellular respiration occurs mainly in the mitochondria of the cell. So something else that's kind of really neat is photosynthesis and cellular respiration are what is known as mirror image processes or opposite processes. So if you kind of follow this diagram around, if you look at the products that are made from photosynthesis, the glucose and the oxygen, they go into the mitochondria. They're the ingredients needed in cellular respiration. And the things that are produced from cellular respiration, CO2 and water, are taken in by the chloroplast as ingredients for photosynthesis. So it's another cycle. The only thing that doesn't keep going around and around in this cycle is the energy itself. So solar energy has to enter in photosynthesis, and chemical energy, mainly ATP, is what's released from cellular respiration. So while this cycle is going on with the different molecules and things, the energy actually kind of flows through. So if we're comparing the two different equations, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, you are going to notice that they are in fact mirror images. So our carbon dioxide and our water, as well as our energy, that are the ingredients of photosynthesis, are our products of cellular respiration, CO2, H2O, and ATP energy. The products of photosynthesis, sugar and oxygen, are our ingredients in cellular respiration, sugar and oxygen. The main thing that's different is the type of energy. In photosynthesis, it takes in solar energy, and in cellular respiration, it kind of puts out ATP energy. Cellular respiration, and I'm going to try to make it as simple and easy as possible because it's a really complicated process. It has 3 steps. The first is called glycolysis, the second is the Krebs cycle, and the third is the electron transport chain. So glycolysis is this process that happens in the cytoplasm, kind of in the cell substance, the cell jelly. And what it does is it breaks sugar down into 2 smaller pieces known as pyruvate. During this process, it also just happens to produce 2 ATP. Next, the Krebs cycle happens in the mitochondria, and it takes those 2 pieces of pyruvate, those 2 chunks of what was once a sugar molecule, it breaks them down further to produce energy-carrying molecules and carbon dioxide. So this is what we exhale, what we breathe out. And this process also produces 2 ATP. Now, finally, the big home run here is the electron transport chain, also happens in the mitochondria, and what it does is it takes those electron-carrying molecules from the Krebs cycle, along with the oxygen we breathe in, and it uses it to produce ATP, and it produces water as a byproduct, sweat, urine, saliva, things like that. And the great thing about the electron transport chain is it produces 34 to 36 molecules of ATP. So out of the 3 steps, this one produces the most. So let's review really quickly. Cellular respiration breaks down blank and produces a type of energy called blank. Well, cellular respiration breaks down sugars and produces a type of energy called ATP. Cellular respiration occurs mainly in the blank of the cell. Cellular respiration occurs mainly in the mitochondria of the cell. The equation of cellular respiration is the blank of photosynthesis. Well, the equation of cellular respiration is the opposite of, or mirror image of, photosynthesis. The 3 steps of cellular respiration are blank, blank, and blank. The 3 steps of cellular respiration are glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. And finally, the total maximum number of ATP molecules produced from cellular respiration is blank. Well, the total maximum number of molecules produced is 38, and that is under perfect conditions. So, cellular respiration is really great, but there are some organisms out there, such as yeast, bacteria, or mold, that will actually try to produce ATP without oxygen. This process of breaking down sugars without oxygen is called fermentation. And actually, during fermentation, sugar is broken down, carbon dioxide is produced, and a byproduct is produced depending on the type of fermentation. What we did in lab the other day was alcoholic fermentation. So we took warm water, yeast, a little bit of sugar, we put them in this Erlenmeyer flask, and we let them sit for a little bit of time. And the yeast were breaking down that sugar, producing CO2, carbon dioxide, which is what blew these balloons up. And it was also producing ethanol, a type of alcohol. Now, there are multiple kinds of fermentation. Alcoholic is the most popular or the most well-known because obviously it produces booze, and it is also used to bake bread. There are other kinds of fermentation, lactic acid fermentation, which makes milk and cheeses and is also part of the reason your muscles are sore after running. And then there are other types of fermentation that are used to make pickled products like kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, pickled peppers, and things like that. Cellular respiration and alcoholic fermentation are similar but not the same. They both use sugar as an ingredient or a reactant, and they both produce CO2 and ATP. The main differences are cellular respiration also uses oxygen and it produces water, whereas alcoholic fermentation also produces ethanol and alcohol. The other main difference is cellular respiration produces a lot more ATP than alcoholic fermentation. So now, after reviewing this whole big thing, you should be thinking about the guiding question: which processes transform energy from sunlight into ATP? Here's kind of a general overview, but I will be asking you to please put these things into your own words in your summary paragraph. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.